Our speaker tonight is Gabe Neville. He talked to us once before, and this time he is back. He's back to speak with us again, and he's the author of a book that I have been reading and trying to absorb. It's pretty heavy stuff. The Last Men Standing, the 8th Virginia Regiment in the American Revolution. It's a wonderful book. We do have it at the courthouse. Gabe lives in Northern Virginia, and I understand that he actually has a day job. I don't know how you manage to do all of it. As I said before, he did an excellent interview with Hank for the podcast. And tonight, he's going to speak to us about the Dunmore County Volunteers and the Williamsburg Powder Alarm in 1775. Gabe?
Hello, everybody. I want to thank you all for having me back. I must not have done too poor a job the first time, so that's gratifying. A couple things I want to say to start off with. You guys are doing a fantastic job celebrating the 250th. It's 8 different museums. You've got how many events on that card, all celebrating the 250th of 1776. I broke Barbara's heart, though. The Revolutionary War lasted 8 years. The 250th started last year, and it ends in 2033. So you have a lot more work to do if you're going to do this right. She's just shaking her head at me. I'm very glad to be here with you tonight. One serious note, my voice has been raspy for actually a couple months. I had bronchitis, and I just haven't given it a rest. I've gone 2 days without talking, basically, getting ready for this, but it may conk out on me, in which case Hank's going to give the second half of the speech. I already told him that. As Suzanne said, I will be back in June. You'll notice that the subtitle here is Part 1. I'll be giving Parts 2 and 3 in June. So tonight's speech will end where the Revolutionary War actually starts. So, how is this microphone, Hank? If I wander just a little bit, can you hear me? I don't want to have to. So just a note about what Virginia was like before the Revolution, during colonial times. It was very English. If you think about Pennsylvania or Maryland, other colonies that had a diversity of folks, religiously in particular, but also ethnically, Virginia wasn't really like that. Virginia was very English. And that included the Church of England. Every Virginian was a parishioner of the Church of England, whether he or she wanted to be or not. You tithed to the Church of England, whether you wanted to or not. In fact, it was the biggest tax people paid. So very different from what we're used to now. It was the Old Dominion. We're all familiar with that nickname, but that is because we were a dominion of the monarchy. Right? We were part of a monarchy. We don't think of ourselves that way today, obviously. But back then, they absolutely did. They always professed their loyalty to the king right up until July 4th, 1776. Virginia, unlike some of its neighbors, was pretty stable and well managed. Thank you very much. The power was dispersed. County government was in many ways the most important level of government. And Virginia was very good at dispersing power. When populations grew, they always created a new county. Other states or colonies were not like that. There was no separation of powers. There was a state church, and it was part of the government. It was strictly Protestant. Catholics were not really allowed to even come for most of the colonial era. There was no expectation of equality. Now, that's most glaringly true with slavery, but it was true between men and women, between rich and poor, between gentlemen and yeoman farmers, and nobody had really ever experienced anything different. Out here, beyond the Blue Ridge, things were a little bit different, and that influences some of what I'm going to talk about tonight. Most of the people, as you know, who lived in this area came down Route 11, back then called the Great Philadelphia Wagon Road, immigrating via Philadelphia from Northern Ireland and southwestern Germany. So that's what this colony in this area was like back then. I mentioned that Virginia was pretty good at creating new counties as populations grew. This is a little map that I created that shows the new counties that were created between 1770 and 1776. You don't need to look at all of them. There's no quiz afterwards, but you see Dunmore County there on the top, almost the top right. That, as I'm sure you all know, is Shenandoah County. It changed its name later because Dunmore was the colonial governor that everybody hated. So that just shows you where we are. And this is where people came from. Northern Ireland, the Protestant part of Ireland, right? And the Palatinate in southwestern Germany, which was the Protestant part of, well, a Protestant part of, well, there was no Germany yet, the Holy Roman Empire. You probably know enough history to know that there were big religious wars in Germany, the 30 Years' War and others between Catholics and Protestants. That lay behind a lot of the emigration. And the British Empire, the Crown, saw itself as the protector of Protestantism. So they encouraged Protestants from these places to come here. So in 1772, the population out here had grown enough that they decided that they were going to split Frederick County into three, creating two new counties. Frederick remained in the middle. To the north of it, they created Berkeley County, and to the south of it, they created Dunmore County. And these are the original members of the Dunmore County Court. Now, when I say court, that sounds like judges, and yes, these men were called judges or justices, but they're also sort of like county supervisors. They were the local government. They were appointed by the governor. But when somebody retired, this group would recommend their own replacement. So it was something like almost a self-perpetuating oligarchy. These were the most responsible men in the county. And by responsible, I mean owned most of the property, et cetera. Now you know that this county was particularly German. Lots of immigrants. But how many German names do you see on this list? Not that many. Harrison, Beale, Pugh, Slaughter, Nelson, Tipton, and Langdon. None of them is German. Only Keller on that first column is German. So I don't know, I have not done enough research to be sure, but it's pretty clear to me that the establishment moved people or looked for people of Anglo descent to sort of run things. Because immigrants didn't really, they weren't Anglican necessarily, probably not. They weren't used to British social institutions. So the quorum, they were like the senior members of the county court. Only one German on there. And they wanted English-spirited people in charge, at least at the beginning. Now, the four junior members of the court, I haven't checked, but they might all be German. Bowman absolutely is German. Holdeman, Martins is probably German. Miller could be German, anglicized to some extent. But that's what the local government looked like. You're probably aware that Thomas Marshall was the first county clerk. He was the father of John Marshall of the Supreme Court. But I'm not aware that he was ever here. You familiar with this term sinecure or sinecure? He got paid while Jonathan Clark did the work. Clark got a third of the money. That was the deal. Now, when the county was stood up, they also created a vestry for the Anglican Church. Actually, this happened first. What's different on this list? Lots of German names, even though it's the Anglican Church vestry. So how could that be? Well, unlike the county court, which was appointed by the governor, the vestry was elected by the people. And the people here were largely German. So Keller, Schnepf, Wolfensberger, Fravel, Huffman, Steiner, Holdeman, those are all German names. And the short list on the right, those are the Anglican names, or the English names. So you had Germans, probably Lutherans, maybe some German Reformed, running the Anglican Church vestry. That's like having Lutherans running an Episcopal church. Right? That's literally what it is, just with the names changed. So this was a little bit of a awkward thing. explains why Peter Muhlenberg came here eventually. But that's part two. Now, one of the guys that came here from the Tidewater was Jonathan Clark. He was the guy that was doing all the work for a third of the pay, the county clerk. The amazing thing about him is he kept a diary every single day from 1770 until the day he died in 1811. I've showed this, I think, in this room once before. It's amazing that he kept it, but what's frustrating is that it says almost nothing. Every day he says what the weather is. Often that's the only thing he says about the day. If he's visiting someone, he'll say who he met with, just the last name, so it's hard to know who. And if there's an event, he'll say so. So here's some examples. Right? You know, when Dunmore County's court first met, brand new county, he was there, May 26, 1772. When they elected Burgesses to the House of Burgesses for the first time, he was there. He goes buck hunting with Peter Muhlenberg in 1774. So there's lots of little gems in there. When they elected the Burgesses, and you all know what the Burgesses is, right? So this is the state legislature. It's the lower chamber of the state legislature, and the only elected part of it. Each county elects 2 Burgesses to represent them. The 1772 to 1774 session of the Burgesses was really the last one. It was the last functioning one. Dunmore County was not represented in the first session because it didn't exist yet. Then they had their election, and they elected Francis Slaughter, originally from Culpeper County, Joseph Watson, originally from Alexandria, to be the Burgesses. Watson died and was replaced by Abraham Byrd, who I have not taken time to research. Does anybody know anything about any of these guys? Okay. I'm sure there's information out there. The third session continued until May 26, 1774, at which time the governor dissolved them. Does anybody know why? Because they declared a day of prayer, fasting, and humiliation in support of the people of Boston because of the Boston Port Act. The Crown had closed the port of Boston because they had thrown the tea in the harbor. This is in Williamsburg. Well, I got things in a little bit funny order here. I'll do this one. So they were meeting in the old Capitol. The reason I have this one here is because when you go to Williamsburg, you'll see the old Capitol here. That actually is an even older Capitol that burned in 1747. During the Revolution, this was the Capitol. Referred to generally in old sources as the old Capitol, but it's not the oldest Capitol. So when I say things are happening at the Capitol, this is one you should think of. So the governor said, okay, I'm going to dissolve you because you're supporting the people of Boston. So they left, and they went across the street, and they reconvened in a tavern. And they decided that they were going to call a convention of delegates from each county, just like the House of Burgesses, 2 from each, and they were going to decide what to do. But they were going to give people 2 months to go home and get the sense of the people at home and see what people thought. And then they would reconvene on August 1st and decide what to do. In the meantime, they would go home and they would have their day of prayer, fasting, and humiliation in each county. There would be a meeting of the people to make their recommendations and instruct their delegates to the convention that were coming. And they also recommended that there be in addition to a Virginia convention, that there be a grand Congress of all the colonies, which became the Continental Congress. So this is what Thomas Jefferson says about how things proceeded. Now, he's from Albemarle County, of course. We returned home and in our several counties invited the clergy to meet assemblies of the people, to perform the ceremonies of the day, and to address them discourses suited to the occasion. The people met generally, with anxiety and alarm in their countenances, and the effect of the day through the whole colony was like a shock of electricity, arousing every man and placing him erect and solidly on his center. So big stuff is starting to happen. Now, Frederick County to the north. Remember, Dunmore County is just 2 years old. It was just created. And some of those members of the county court that I showed you were originally on the Frederick County court before it split. So Dunmore's still looking a little bit to Frederick County for example, leadership, and their coordinating. So just to the north in Frederick County, Taverner, Charles Minthruston is the rector of the Anglican church up there, which is now the Episcopal Church. He's the parish rector. He gives this address, the kind that Jefferson just described. And it is remembered by a Dunmore County citizen as an address in which the arbitrary and oppressive acts of the British government were forcibly exposed. The people urged to resistance, and the young men encouraged and excited to take up arms in defense of the country. The impression made by this speech on the assembly was like an electric shock, causing a universal agitation in the audience. It's interesting that they both say electric shock. I also wonder what people thought electricity was in 1774, but they evidently knew. This is Jonathan Clark's diary. On June 11th, he says it was raining. He also says there was an alarm about the Indians. A great many people assembled in Woodstock. So this is maybe the last Indian alarm that is recorded. This is in the middle of what was known as Lord Dunmore's War. Most of the fighting happens much farther west than here, but on that day there was a fear that the Indians were coming. On the next day, it rained, and he went to church in Woodstock. This, given the nature of his diary, there's no way to know what happened at church that day, but it may have been the day of prayer and fasting, led by Peter Muhlenberg. 4 days after that, it was clear, not raining anymore, and he says, an association in Woodstock by county. So an association, in the terms they used back then, that means a boycott. That means people coming together, people associating together and saying, we're not going to buy British goods anymore, right? This had been discussed at the Raleigh Tavern, and the freeholders of Dunmore County had their meeting, and they said, yep, we're not going to buy anything from Britain anymore. I think there was an exception for medicine, until our rights are restored, until they stop taxing us without representation, and a list of other grievances. And then on a week later, up in Winchester, they have an election of delegates to the convention, and it becomes a virtual riot. I think I have, they burned General Gage, who was the military governor up in Boston that was put there by the king after the Boston Tea Party. They burn him in effigy, and they read his proclamation and mock it. So it was a big event up in Winchester. Here in Dunmore County, it seems to have been more muted, but they did have a meeting, and they elected Peter Muhlenberg, Francis Slaughter, Abraham Byrd, Taverner Beale, John Tipton, and Abraham Bowman to draw up resolves. So these are it's like a resolution. Most counties came up with these resolutions. And they were public statements of principle, but also instructions to the two men who were elected to go to the Virginia Convention in August. The entire Dunmore County document, the resolves, was published in the Virginia Gazette. Whenever I mention one of these things, in a county where a surviving set of resolves exists, I wag my finger and I say that every school kid in this county should be reading these. It's like Shenandoah County's own Declaration of Independence. It really is, except it's a year older. Among the things that it says are that we will always cheerfully pay due submission to such acts of government as His Majesty has a right by law to exercise over his subjects as sovereign to the British dominions, and such only. Right? They're loyal, but it's conditional. No taxation without representation. The East India Company, the guys that are selling tea, they're a bunch of no-goodniks. And this is the election of burgesses in Frederick, where they burned General Gage in effigy. So Francis Slaughter and Abraham Byrd are elected from this county to go to the Virginia Convention, which convenes in August of '74. They form a Virginia Association, as recommended by the freeholders of this county and several other counties, and they agree we're not buying any more, or we're not buying any more British anything until we get our rights back. Furthermore, they declare that in a year we're going to stop selling anything to Britain if we don't get our rights back. They also elected delegates to the First Continental Congress, who you see listed down there at the bottom. When the First Continental Congress met, they endorsed the Virginia suggestion of having an association. So on top of the Virginia Association, the boycott, there's a Continental Association. So they're not going to, but nobody in the 13 colonies is going to buy anything from Britain until we get our rights back. Moreover, Congress recommends an enforcement mechanism. They recommend that each county, each city, each town, and all of the colonies forms a committee to enforce the boycott. That's in October of '74. So here in January, the Dunmore freeholders get together again, and this is what Peter Muhlenberg writes in the letter. Independent companies are forming in every county, and politics engross all conversation. I had thrown up my commission as chairman of the Committee of Correspondence and of Magistrate likewise. But last week we had a general election in the county for a great committee, according to the resolves of Congress, and I am chosen chairman, so that whether I choose or not, I am to be a politician. So this is, usually you hear these referred to as the Committee of Safety. In Virginia, the Committee of Safety was the revolutionary executive in Williamsburg. When the governor was chased out, there was a group of men who functioned as a plural executive, as the executive committee. That technically speaking was the Committee of Safety. The county committees were just called the county committee. But nowadays we used to say Committee of Safety. I try to just say committee. But Peter Muhlenberg is the chairman of the Dunmore Committee. Now, that was pretty early. As months go on, and then eventually as more than a year goes on, the committee takes on more and more importance. So here's a defiant loyalist who writes a letter to the committee after he's been summoned by them. He says, "Gentlemen, I have this moment received a summons to appear before your grand tribunal, which, considering my duty to my sovereign, I cannot comply with. For, gentlemen, permit me to tell you that so long as you remain refractory and yield no submission to the mandates of the king, I shall pay no obedience to the summons of an illegal assembly, combined in the most unjustifiable manner, and have under their consideration the most treasonable proceedings. Therefore, you have my free consent to make what conjectures you think proper with regard to my conduct. And I assure you, I feel with the most perfect indifference what they are or the consequences of them." He's not going along with the program. He don't care, right? The committee caught a guy named William Holiday selling tea. The Virginia import ban under the Virginia Association started in November. The Continental Association started in December, but he was selling it in February afterward. Now, in the Continental Association, there was a little clause. It was the non-consumption provision. He wasn't importing tea. He was just selling it here. He already had the tea, right? Starting in March, you're not supposed to consume tea or sell tea that you already have. And it's not March yet. So he's litigating this, the Committee of Safety, and there's a record of that too. Now, here's a guy named William Clark, who maybe, the letter I showed you, the guy that was going to pay no attention to what the committee said, we don't know that guy's name. It doesn't say at the bottom. It may have been William Clark, but we don't know. But he is forced to sign this. And it says, I, William Clark of the said county, do hereby declare on the holy evangelist of Almighty God that from henceforth I will not either publicly or privately hold any correspondence with any person whatsoever who shall speak disrespectfully of the Continental Congress or any committee of any county or their proceedings. And I hereby declare that the Americans are justly entitled to those privileges for which they are contending, and further, that I will depart from the town of Woodstock within 10 minutes from this time and from the county of Dunmore before tomorrow night, and not return therein for the space of 1 year. He's being expelled. Now, 4 slides ago, I quoted Muhlenberg saying that there are independent companies forming everywhere. So just like the committee is like a shadow county court or county supervisors, just like the committee of safety is like a shadow governor, they're taking the governor's place, you have these independent volunteer companies that are sort of in the place of the militia. The militia are established by law, they report to the governor. So if the militia were to start acting in a revolutionary fashion, that would be kind of treasonous. If you form your own volunteer group, you can kind of fudge things. It's just a club. You know, we're not doing anything, right? So these formed in many, many counties. Remarkably, down in the Library of Virginia, we have the roster of every man who belonged to the Dunmore County Volunteers. Now, they refer to themselves as the first independent company of Dunmore. And they were, in fact, usually referred to as independent companies at the time. Technically, they were volunteers. And there was another kind of independent company that were actually provincial soldiers or continental soldiers later. So I like to stick with the term volunteers. And I'm not going to read this, but this is what they all signed when they enrolled in the Dunmore County Volunteers. And there's a list of all 88 men who signed on. Some of those last names are probably familiar, either from people you know or from place names around here. You've got Bowman, you've got Pugh. There's several names, Height, that will sound familiar. So I invite you to take a longer look at that later if you think you might have an ancestor or somebody who's on there. Also notable are there are 5 or 6 members of the county court. Jonathan Clark, the clerk. Abraham Bowman, who was the first lieutenant colonel of the 8th Virginia Regiment, and then the colonel after Peter Muhlenberg became a general, and several other people of some note. Okay, the Francis Slaughter and Abraham Byrd, who had been elected to the 1st Virginia Convention, were not elected to the 2nd Virginia Convention. I think probably because either the folks here wanted somebody with a little more revolutionary fervor representing them at the convention, or maybe Francis Slaughter and Abraham Byrd didn't have quite enough revolutionary fervor to feel comfortable going back again. But this time, Jonathan Clark and Peter Muhlenberg are the delegates. They're there to hear Patrick Henry give his famous speech, "Give me liberty or give me death." It is there that the convention formally encourages counties to form volunteer companies, and they elect delegates to the 2nd Continental Convention. I show Jonathan Clark and Peter Muhlenberg there, but I also show Frederick County's delegates because they have one thing in common. Both of them include the rector of the local parish. Thurston is the rector of Frederick Parish, Frederick County, and Muhlenberg is the rector of Beckford Parish, which is Dunmore County. Clergy were playing a very important role in this, right back to the day of prayer, fasting, and humiliation. And Thurston and Muhlenberg both became military men. So then in Williamsburg. That's the governor dressed up in his Scottish attire. That portrait is in the a British portrait gallery. I don't think he dressed that way when he was strolling around Williamsburg. If he did, God bless him. The building in the back, you probably know, is the powder magazine in Williamsburg. It was more than just a place to store gunpowder. It was also an armory. So there were many, many kegs of gunpowder. There were muskets, maybe rifles. And Dunmore got a message from London, as did other governors, that we probably should just quietly remove gunpowder and weapons from people that are getting a little bit too excited in order to prevent any unfortunate happenings. So in the middle of the night, he sends some guys, some soldiers, British soldiers from a ship, they're referred to as Marines in one place, to just sneak into the powder magazine and remove all the gunpowder and take it to their ship. But they get caught. People see it, and there's an alarm. They make it back to the ship before anybody can do anything, but there is now a big mob in Williamsburg that is furious. Peyton Randolph, here on the right, who was the Speaker of the House of Burgesses, President of the First and Second Virginia Conventions, President of the First and Second Continental Congresses. He died shortly after the beginning of the Second Continental Congress. He went to the governor's mansion and had a meeting with Dunmore, along with some other folks, and tried to resolve things amicably. And Dunmore basically just said, well, I think most people think Dunmore just lied. He said, well, you know, there's rumors of a slave uprising in Surrey County, so we wanted to get the gunpowder out of here. Well, that doesn't convince anybody. If there's a slave uprising, they're going to want the gunpowder, right? But, you know, Randolph says in one letter that it seemed to be a point of honor with Dunmore. Like, he didn't want to call him a liar to his face, so he sort of let it go for a little bit. Meanwhile, however, the guys on the left, news is spreading throughout Virginia that the governor has stolen the gunpowder. And so these volunteer companies that I was telling you about, they start to congregate. They start to move towards Williamsburg to get the gunpowder back. And news spreads that there's going to be a rendezvous in Fredericksburg, and from there they're going to march on Williamsburg. So, Jonathan Clark and the Dunmore County Volunteers start there in Woodstock. The way to get to Williamsburg, counterintuitively, is to march north, because you have to go through a pass in the Blue Ridge. And the easiest one is Ashby's Gap. So they march north, and then they're going to turn east, and then march down to Williamsburg. That's the path. It'll take a week or so. This is what Jonathan Clark says. May 1st, it's clear. At least they got nice weather for the march, right? At John Huffman's, marched as far as Stoverstown on the way to Williamsburg concerning the taking of the magazine, and camped out. Next day, May 2nd, it's clear. Our march to Williamsburg has been countermanded, and we returned at Lawrence Snap's house and had a barbecue at Tom's Brook. So what has happened is Peyton Randolph has kind of worked things out with the governor. He says, yeah, I took the gunpowder. It's because I think there's going to be a slave uprising. But if you really need it, I promise, like, we'll bring it right back. If something happens, we'll take it off the ship and we'll bring it right back, and it'll be available for everybody. Nobody really buys it, but it smooths things over for the time being. And Randolph sends a letter to the congregating, they're usually called militia in books, but they're really not militia. They're volunteers, independent companies, at Fredericksburg, saying, guys, everything's worked out, go home. So all of this has happened 5 or 6 days before. News travels slowly. So by the time they're camped out up near Strasburg, news finally reaches them that the powder alarm, the emergency's off, so they can go home. So This is the Snap House off Route 11 near Toms Brook. It's still there. I showed you the entry in his diary. I like to think that the emergency was off, so they went to Lawrence Snap's house and had a barbecue. There aren't enough ands and conjunctions in the sentence. It could be that the barbecue was somewhere else, but they returned to this house, and then at least Jonathan Clark went somewhere for a barbecue. And it can't have been planned because they were marching on Williamsburg, right? So I think they went here and had a barbecue. Can't be proven. Somebody's fixing that house up, by the way, which is great. All right, Patrick Henry doesn't get the message, or if he does, he dismisses it. So he's down in Hanover County, and with the Hanover, New Kent, and King William Volunteers, he says, no, we're going to go get that gunpowder. So they're marching on Williamsburg no matter what Peyton Randolph says. And the receiver general, who was like the guy that holds the checkbook for the governor, for the crown, they work out a deal. This is actually kind of worth reading because it's clear that they negotiated a long time over this language. They paid Patrick Henry 330 pounds for the gunpowder on condition that he would then take it with, he's been elected to the Second Continental Congress. He's going to take the money to Philadelphia. It's then going to be in the hands of the Virginia delegation, and they can use it to buy gunpowder for the colony, right? Unless the next Virginia convention decides that they shouldn't, right? This is all face-saving. But the receipt still exists, and it was a way of smoothing things over yet again. If they had not, this was the second time that a war could have started. The first powder alarm, by the way, happened basically at the same time as Lexington and Concord. And by the time he signs this receipt, they know about Lexington and Concord. And Lexington and Concord started over the exact same facts, right? We're going to go get the gunpowder and the weapons from these rambunctious rebels. So the war could have easily started down here on the same day. Powder magazine, or the powder alarm is over. Things have settled down a little bit. But then up here, before they know about Lexington and Concord, one of the militia captains from the Dunmore militia has been up in Winchester. And he comes back and he sends a note to the Committee of Safety, or the committee here. And it says, I returned from Frederick Court very late last night. It's believed that the governor has passed his word and honor in an ambiguous manner for the returning of the ammunition. In other words, sure, he's going to bring it back if we need it. We don't believe him, right? And it is thought that he has fixed no time for doing so. It is said another action has been at Boston. Notice he says another action. They had an earlier powder alarm in Boston that was similar to the one here that was a false alarm. It is said that another action has been at Boston that one or more general officers of the regulars fell in it. A general has been killed. Not true. But in my opinion, it can be but slightly credited as it is told so many different ways. This is the very first news of Lexington and Concord to reach the Shenandoah Valley. And it's not exactly accurate. There's, a general died. Nobody really knows exactly what's going on. But this is the first recorded news of it. McKeer also says that he heard that a fast ship from London brought news that 20 men of war, so big British battleships, right? And 95 transports were coming with orders to block up every port in the colonies except for New York and Quebec. Remember, Quebec's just another colony at this point. If it is so, he says, there will be bloody breaches. We're at war. And that's my presentation. that's my website if you want to learn more. I've got a YouTube channel and some other stuff, and that's my my book. If you want to buy one, they're $40. The approach I try to take in the book is to make it about the men in the war. I start with their kids, and I finish when they're old men. It's not just they went here and pulled the trigger, and then they marched there, and the general said this and that. And it's really about this area, so I think you'll enjoy it.